we return to the life and operas of Verdi. This is Lecture 25, and it is entitled Otello. What Verdi read. In Verdi's combination bedroom, music studio, home office at the Villa Verdi stands a small bookcase, about 4 feet tall, at the foot of his bed. On the top shelves of the bookcase, Verdi kept the books that he always read, reread, and read again. He never moved them and never changed them. They rest there to this very day. Shakespeare's complete works in translation by Giulio Carcano are there, as are the complete works of Dante and Schiller's plays, translated by his friend Andrea Maffei. One shelf down is Verdi's copy of Milton's Paradise Lost, the works of Byron, translated by Carlo Rosconi, the King James Bible, and French and Italian dictionaries. While there are no opera scores, not even his own, on the very top shelf, there are scores of the string quartets of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. You know, we have talked about Verdi's debt to Rossini, Donizetti, and Bellini, and his study of Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. But we haven't talked about his debt to and affection for the music of Beethoven. An anecdote will have to suffice. In 1889, by which time Verdi was, very simply, the most famous and beloved living composer, he was asked by the violinist Joseph Joachim to contribute his name and support to a Beethoven festival being planned in Bonn. Verdi, the arch-Italian composer, replied, and we quote, "I cannot refuse the honor that is offered to me. We are talking about Beethoven. Before such a name, we all prostrate ourselves reverently," unquote. The conspiracy. In the spring of 1879, a series of floods on the Po River and its various tributaries turned whole districts of the provinces of Piacenza, Parma, Mantua, and Ferrara into sodden, gooey messes. Verdi organized a concert at La Scala for the benefit of the victims of the floods. And on June 30th, 1879, he conducted his requiem to what was referred to as a delirious audience response. The concert was a huge financial success, raising over 37,000 lira for the flood victims. At the conclusion, as Verdi took his bows, the front of the stage was showered and literally covered with flowers, thrown there by members of the audience. Likewise, Verdi's room at the Albergo Milano and the hotel lobby were filled with flowers, and after the concert, the entire orchestra of La Scala marched down the Via Manzoni, set up underneath Verdi's balcony, and performed a lengthy and spontaneous concert of Verdi overtures to the delight of the thousands of people who quickly gathered to listen. Now, we bring this up not only as an example of Verdi's philanthropy, which, as we discussed in Lecture 24, was prodigious, and we bring it up not only as an example of Verdi's popularity in Italy in 1879, by which time he was, very simply, the most revered and beloved living Italian. We bring it up, this matter of the benefit concert, because of a conversation that took place while Verdi was staying in Milan and preparing for that benefit concert in June of 1879. Verdi and Giuseppina threw a little dinner party for Verdi's publisher, Giulio Ricordi, and some other guests. And during the course of the evening, the subject of Gioacchino Rossini's opera Otello, based on Shakespeare's play and composed back in 1816, came up. The assembled group was not terribly kind to Rossini's librettist, Francesco Berio di Salsa, whom they accused of writing a really awful libretto, one that was, charitably speaking, unpoetic and dramatically ridiculous. A casual dinner conversation, yes? Oh no, most assuredly not. Although 7 years had passed since the composition of Aida, and 6 years since the Requiem, Verdi was still the hottest ticket in Italy and one of the most beloved composers in the entire world. And there he is in Milan, having dinner with his publisher, whose own livelihood was inextricably tied to Verdi and his music, and the subject of Rossini's bungled Otello just happens to come up? Right. And during that same spontaneous and casual dinner conversation, Giulio Ricordi just happened to mention to Verdi that the writer, librettist, and composer Arrigo Boito 29 years Verdi's junior and one of the most talented men of his generation, Giulio Ricordi just happened to mention that Boito was working on his own libretto of Shakespeare's Otello, and would Verdi, just as a matter of professional courtesy, like to take a look at it? We know a setup when we see one, and so did Verdi. Indeed, as it turns out, it was a conspiracy with the active involvement of Giuseppina, Clara Maffei, Giulio Ricordi, the conductor Franco Faccio, and Arrigo Boito himself, with the aim of initiating a collaboration between Verdi and Boito. Many years later, Ricordi told his biographer, Giuseppe Adami, and we quote Ricordi, "At the mention of Shakespeare's Othello, I saw Verdi fix his eyes on me with suspicion, but with interest too. He had certainly understood. He had certainly reacted. I believed the time was ripe," unquote. Verdi did indeed consent to meet with Boito, and their meeting went well. Very soon after, Ricordi wrote Verdi a chatty little note. What do you know, Joe? How's it going? And during the course of the letter, Ricordi innocently inquired as to how Verdi's little tete-a-tete with Boito went, if perhaps they had discussed any operatic projects, whatever. Verdi knew that Ricordi was fishing, casting about for information, and he didn't reply to Ricordi's letter right away. Finally, a couple of months later, Verdi wrote back to Ricordi to let him know where the project did or didn't stand. As the case was, Verdi wrote, and we quote, "You know how this chocolate project was born. You were dining with me. We spoke of Otello, of Shakespeare, of Boito. I'll tell you what you already know. The next day, Boito came to me at the hotel. 3 days later, he brought me a sketch of Otello, which I read and found good. 'Do the poetry,' I said to him. 'It will come in handy for you and for someone else, for some other composer,' unquote." And so began a project that Verdi had no intention whatsoever of getting himself involved in, a project that would culminate 8 years later in the premiere of his greatest serious opera, the greatest opera seria, truly, of the 19th century. Arrigo Boito, Pork and Beans, Abbott and Costello, Koufax and Drysdale, Bert and Ernie, B.B. King and Lucille, George and Ira Gershwin, the Coen brothers, Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon, Popeye and Olive Oil, Olives and Martinis, Martin and Lewis, Lewis and Clark, Clark and Lois. My friends, the great duos, the great partnerships in which a virtually perfect balance is struck between two perfectly complementary elements, well, they're as rare as working accordion players. We're reminded of the aforementioned Johnny Carson's definition of an optimist, an accordion player with a beeper. And in the world of opera, great creative duos, by which we refer not to singers but to composers and librettists, are even fewer and more far between. Of the 42,000 plus operas written since 1600, that number courtesy of Joseph Wexberg, only the merest handful have been created by teams in which both composer and librettist were artists of genius. Christoph Gluck and Raniero di Calzabigi, Wolfgang Mozart and Lorenzo da Ponte, Richard Strauss and Hugo Hofmannsthal, Giuseppe Verdi and Arrigo Boito. Verdi's last two operas, Otello and Falstaff, both based on plays by Shakespeare, each of which has a libretto by Arrigo Boito, are transcendental masterworks. Theirs was truly an operatic marriage made in heaven, and for Verdi, better late than never, although given the relationship between the two men prior to their collaboration, it was a marriage that might very well never have taken place.